The Russian information space is treating today like a holiday. They claim that India hasn't refused to buy Russian oil, put Donald Trump in his place, and so on. And it seems that India, well, as if it really decided to test the strength of Donald Trump's threats to impose a 100% tariff on Indian goods if India continues to buy Russian oil. Or is there now a decision hanging in the air that would allow Donald Trump not to impose these tariffs at all? But this decision has not been made public yet. The thing is, Indian officials who just a week ago were saying they were ready to give up Russian oil and even made trial purchases of Middle Eastern and American oil are now suddenly saying that they haven't changed their policy regarding the import of Russian oil. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India even emphasized that Indian oil refineries reserve the right to make independent energy decisions. So what's going on? Is India acting inconsistently? Is it Trump's India, or is Trump preparing some new decision that will contradict his own statements? And here, I should note right away that Russians have already gotten excited about this news and are 100% sure that India has simply ditched Donald Trump and will never give up Russian oil. It's not that simple, and Russians will still have reasons to be upset about this, but let's take it step by step. My name is Pechy. Today is August 3rd. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechy News. The link is in this video's description. So, officials in the Indian government said today that India will continue to buy oil from Russia despite threats of sanctions from United States President Donald Trump. Reuters was the first to report this, and here we need to take a closer look. Although, in addition to the new 25% tariff on Indian exports to the United States, Trump stated last month in a post on the Truth Social website that India would face additional penalties for purchasing Russian weapons and oil. On Friday, Trump told reporters that, according to him, India would never buy oil from Russia again. He claimed that this was supposedly a completely settled issue, and that India would ultimately not buy Russian oil. And, let me remind you, there have indeed already been signals about this. Is India preparing to give up Russian oil? Let me briefly remind you, on July 31 it became known that 4 of India's largest state-owned oil refineries announced that they were refusing Russian oil. Moreover, according to sources, these refineries are not even considering Russia anymore when planning their future crude oil purchases. According to sources, 4 of India's oil refineries regularly purchase Russian oil with deliveries. These are mainly Middle Eastern grades, such as Murban oil from Abu Dhabi and West African oil. But that's not all. There are also 2 major private oil refining companies in India, Reliance Industries and Nayara Energy. They are the largest buyers of Russian oil in India. But state-owned oil refineries control more than 60% of India's total oil refining capacity, which amounts to 5.2 million barrels per day. Nevertheless, the 2 private companies are also gradually giving up Russian oil because they have always exported their petroleum products to Europe, but Europe has adopted new sanctions that ban the purchase of petroleum products if they are produced from Russian oil. At that time, many experts stated that India was planning to completely replace Russian oil with oil from the Persian Gulf countries and Africa, including America. Let's move on to that now. The Persian Gulf countries are already signaling that they are ready to increase production to supply Europe. By the way, today, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries Plus decided that in September they will once again increase the oil production quota, which means there will be more oil on the market. But in this context, many have already forgotten that back in February, the Indian authorities stated that they were willing to increase imports of American oil and gas to reduce the trade imbalance between the 2 countries. Back in February, the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vikram Mesri, stated, and I quote, "I think we have purchased energy resources from the United States worth about $15 billion. There is a high probability that this figure will increase to at least $25 billion. It is quite possible that the increase in energy purchases will affect the deficit between India and the United States." At that time, Indian state-owned companies announced that they would buy more American oil from liquefied natural gas, But most importantly, back in February, in a joint statement by leaders Narendra Modi and Donald Trump, both promised to further increase energy trade. A quote from this statement is to establish the United States as a leading supplier of crude oil and petroleum products from liquefied natural gas to India. In general, the United States will also take its place in supplying oil to India instead of Russia. It's important to remember here that this isn't something new for India. In 2021, India was the main buyer of American oil, importing about 406,000 barrels per day, and this made up 14.5% of the total United States exports. But editor, then Russia launched a full-scale war against Ukraine, Europe refused Russian oil, and the Kremlin began selling it at large discounts. India fell for all this and started buying simply outrageous huge amounts of Russian oil. By 2024, the United States accounted for less than 5% of all Indian imports, while the share of Russian oil jumped to 38%. Although before the war, this figure was at around 2%. Now, Trump is trying to restore this pre-war balance and at the same time deprive Russia of oil revenues. And Trump's statement that India will no longer buy Russian oil fits perfectly into this logic. It's better for India to buy more American oil, and Trump is trying to push this idea. Sources in the Indian government told Reuters today that there will be no immediate changes in the policy of purchasing Russian oil. I stress, now, let's resolve this immediately. They say that India has long-term oil contracts with Russia and it's not so easy to stop purchases overnight, justifying India's oil purchases from Russia. A source in the Indian government stated that India's import of Russian grades helped avoid a global spike in oil prices, which remain low despite Western restrictions on the Russian oil sector. They say that India actually saved the whole world because there was a lot of Russian oil. The West didn't want to buy it, but India saved everyone by starting to buy it all themselves. There was no spike in the global market. According to the source, unlike Iranian and Venezuelan oil, Russian oil is not subject to direct sanctions, and India buys it at a price below the current price cap set by the European Union. It seems like everything is legal, everything is above board. Moreover, the New York Times on Saturday, just the day before, also quoted two unnamed senior Indian officials who said that there have been no immediate changes in the Indian government's policy. In addition to that, on Friday, Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal stated that India and Russia have, quote, stable and time-tested partnerships. As for our energy source requirements, we look at what is available on the markets, what is being offered, and also what the prevailing threshold is. The global situation or circumstances? And it's important to remember here that Trump threatened to impose 100% tariffs on imports to the United States from countries buying Russian oil if Moscow does not reach an important peace agreement with Ukraine. Today, Russia is the leading supplier of oil to India, the world's third largest importer and consumer of oil, accounting for about 35–38% of total supplies. Let me remind you again, in 2021 the key seller was America, now it's Russia. And next I'll quote Reuters. But although Trump's threats may not stop the Indian government, sources told Reuters this week that Indian state-owned refineries have stopped buying Russian oil. After July, discounts dropped to their lowest level since 2022. When were sanctions first imposed on Moscow due to declining Russian exports and steady demand? Four sources told the agency that for the third week in a row, they did not buy any Russian oil at all. In addition, don't forget that there is also the private oil refinery Nayara Energy, a controlling stake of which is owned by Russian companies, including the oil company Rosneft. This plant was recently sanctioned by the European Union, and the chief executive officer of Nayara Energy resigned immediately after the sanctions were imposed. And 3 vessels already loaded with Nayara Energy petroleum products still haven't unloaded anywhere, because new European Union sanctions have already been imposed. I'll explain above which ones. Which of course puts the operation of the plant itself at risk as long as it works with Russian oil. It's now essential to find new markets for these oil products or replace the crude oil. So the conclusion from this whole story is the following. Most likely, India will ask Donald Trump to give them conclusions, and for the transition period. After all, it will be difficult to replace all Russian oil with American, Middle Eastern, or African oil overnight. And the statements by Indian officials that they will continue to buy Russian oil should not be interpreted the way Russians do. After all, the statement by Indian officials clearly includes the quote, "There are no immediate changes." India has long-term oil contracts with Russia. And it's not so easy to stop purchases overnight, period. But no one is making a statement that India will completely refuse Russian oil. Everyone opposed Trump. It was inevitable. So most likely the story will play out like this. There are already contracts, they need to be fulfilled, new contracts won't be signed, and other oil will be purchased instead. Of course, for a certain period, we'll see that oil supplies from Russia are continuing. Finally, I'll share crucial news that the Russians will undoubtedly attempt to conceal to the greatest extent possible. According to Bloomberg, India's largest oil refinery, Indian Oil Corporation, has purchased millions of barrels of oil from the United States of America and the United Arab Emirates. According to the agency, over the past week the company has purchased at least 5 million barrels of American oil as well as received 2 million barrels of crude from the Emirates. And all of these are just trial batches to start switching the refineries' operations to these types of crude oil. So I'll leave it at that for now. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.